Hello and welcome back to another Space Engineers mod showcase video. In today's video, we're looking at the beam system. But before I go any further, this does contain a lot of flashing lights and some exceptionally bright lights. So if you are affected by any of those things such as epilepsy, or you simply get nauseous from bright lights, please click off this video now. This is essentially a super laser system where you can redirect the beam in whichever direction you want. You can even attach a rotor to one of the blocks and move the laser beam in all directions, and even have it controlled by a script so it can be like those custom turrets you see on the workshop. But before we go any further, let's take a look at some of these blocks. So let's start with the tiddly little tiny blocks over here. So this little cube right here is the laser combiner. What this does is take the laser beam and forces the beam to go in whichever direction you want it. And you can see we have these little white arrows on the side, which is where the beam is going to come out. So all these other sides on it are where the beam can touch it, and it'll simply be redirected in that direction. Coming across to this thing right here, this is the laser generator, which is how we start the little beam off and send it to one of these little blocks if we need to change the direction. There's a few other things we can do when combining these two blocks together, but I'll come to that a little bit later on. Anyway, this is the block right here. It's a fancy little block. What we see behind them, however, is a lot bigger and more destructive. These are the ion systems. This right here, which looks like a jump drive but isn't, it's the same as that little cube over there. This is how we redirect the beam to the direction we want it to go. Once again, we can stick a rotor underneath it and change it to fire in any direction we wish. The next block along is the capacitor. This is how we charge up the beam in order for it to do its maximum amount of damage. Those little black rings you see at the top there are 5 of them, indicate the charge of the ion beam, 20% per ring, and once they're all lit up, you are good to fire and basically destroy whatever you point the beam at. Coming across is the ion generator. So it's like the small little laser generator over there, but it consumes a crap ton of power. 9 large reactors are needed to generate this thing. But it is worth it, I think. Very much worth it. So I'm now going to do a small little demonstration of how to set this up, and at the very end I'll go over the costs if you're interested. So what I've got here is a small little block with a large reactor on it, and I'm going to start with the laser generator. So wheeling it in and turning it around, we have the little white arrows, and this is where we want the beam to go. So I'm going to plop it down here. Boom. Easy peasy stuff. And now I'm going to come over to the control panel and turn on the power. We're going to use maximum power, which is 125 watts. For comparison, the large reactor outputs 300 megawatts, so we do have some leeway with the amount we can place down. But we then get this little tiny little beam coming out of it. It's tiny and not like what you see on the workshop now, is it? But what happens when we place the combiner down? Nothing. It does nothing because we're facing the same direction. But then we can place this. Using the arrows, I've changed the direction. And there we go. It's now going at a 90-degree angle. And I'm going to place one here so I don't destroy the blocks in the background. Then I'm going to make it fold in onto itself. Beam's getting brighter, isn't it? And it's getting very funky. So what is happening here is basically the beam is going in a loop and is generating even more power. So this beam is getting Super Saiyan essentially, where the beam will get bigger and bigger and bigger until it reaches its maximum damage power, where it'll be super thick. And then you release it and it'll blast whatever enemy you're pointing at. So ideally you'd have one of these blocks on a rotor. So if I was to say have this so it's facing in that direction, and then that block would be sitting on a rotor. Once you've hit the absolute maximum beam power, you would then change it to that block, fire it straight ahead, and boom, your enemy's dead. And this is where the rotor script would come in, because you could then set up a proper turret, so you can control it in all directions, and simply have it charging up in the meantime, and then when you want to fire it, you can then just switch it over and boom, you're ready to go. Having the beam going in a complete square is not going to be consuming any more power than needed. This whole block here is just going to generate all it needs. But what we can do is add another little generator on the end here. So finding the control panel and increasing the power, we blow everything up. Okay, well, that didn't want to work this time. But it does beautifully lead me on to this. So without any generator, the laser is still going. Now you might be asking, why? Is this a bug? No, it's a feature. You see, the energy itself is still being whizzed around those 4 blocks, but it will gradually get weaker until it eventually pitters out into nothingness. So we can, if we really wanted to, still fire it. So if I was to release this block, it sort of releases a pathetic little beam, because there's not enough power going through it. So yes, it can have residual power if the generator gets blown up. Oh, look at that. Amazing, isn't it? You can have this going around all you want, and the best part about it, if I was to turn off my jetpack, beam does not hurt, but you can physically block it. But yes, if I was just to walk into this one, we get a lot of sparks, a lot of flashing lights, and we're taking damage. It's a very powerful beam, maybe a little too overpowered for what it is. But yes, you can redirect it in whichever direction you want. If you want, you can just go and take a rotor, like so. And let's say have a rotor there. Let's go like that. Let's then put a seat on it. Let's get a control seat. So we can then get into this. I can then take control of the rotor. I can now just do this, and to control it, left and right. You can go one further and add a secondary rotor if you want to go up and down as well. But as you can see in the distance, I am damaging those blocks. Let's just spin around. Spin around like a disco, in fact. Whee! Okay, that's making me a bit nauseous. Let's just turn it off. But let's move on to the ion. Yes, the ion, the big boys. So placing a block over here, in fact, let's make a massive grid. Like so. We're now going to play with the ion stuff. These things are massive, by the way, and they cost a lot. So much, in fact, that they get cut off by my screen. So once again, we have the little white arrow, where we're going to place this down, and the beam is going to go forward. But you're probably noticing that there's no power coming out of it. So I need to come over here, make another grid. In fact, let's come over to here. Press this little button and put the power. This large thing uses 2.5 kilowatts of power as opposed to that small thing over there which appears to be going Super Saiyan. So 8 reactors are what we need to have power for this one generator, which once again releases a tiny little beam. So what we need to do once again is play around with the combiner. So we want this to go, let's say this direction. So we've changed the direction of the combiner, but now I need to actually build. I just come across like this. Like that. Let's now go like that. But we're not going to just do that. Oh no, we're going to put the capacitor onto it. Now the capacitor here is now just going to sit there, and well, it's not going to charge up because there's no beam going around. The way this works is we have to create a loop in order for the actual ion beam to charge up. Unlike the laser beam, which can deal a lot of damage by itself, the ion beam needs to charge up and thus charge the capacitor to reach its full potential. So as you can see, it's now starting to light up and the blue beam is starting to glow. Even though I have completely missed the mark with this laser, it doesn't matter as long as you hit the block. That is the one thing with this. You have to be able to hit the block, doesn't matter where, as long as they touch, it will connect. So this is now generating a beam. A rather fancy beam, in fact. And the capacitor will start charging up, hopefully. I might have put that on wrong. In fact, I'm just going to reattach the capacitor right here. The capacitor is now going to start charging up. So the first ring is now starting to light up because it is indicated that I'm at 15% power. So it's 20% per ring, and that is getting very bright. What I can do to make this more fun is essentially, let's build a load more of them. Let's give it maximum power, and add another generator onto this thing. So I've now got a secondary generator onto the laser beam system. And I'm going to activate this, where it's getting exceptionally bright now. Look at that go. That is now very slowly lighting up the second one. It should be at roughly 25% power now. Yep, it's now at 30% power. And this will continuously charge up until 100% until one day you remove a block and it annihilates everything in its path. The ranges on these things are pretty long. The small laser can go up to 4 kilometers, and the ion system, which you see in front of me, can go up to 25 kilometers. So it has quite a nasty range on them to blow up stuff, and it's left a small little dent in the ice. But despite having those exceptionally long ranges, there is a small little catch to it. So I'm just going to, let's just delete these. And I'm going to place down the laser system once again, like so. Let's go put the large reactor down so it has power, and turn on the power of this. The power is now on, but now I need to find this. Watch what happens if I was to place this here. It blows up. Blows up. Blows up. It's fine. There is a maximum range you can have the combiner from the actual laser before it takes damage, which is roughly 9 blocks. So if you exceed that, it's going to blow up. But it is fine once you have done that to then go across. So we can have even more laser things. Bit too many there. So the same thing applies to the ion system, but it's a little bit longer before it blows up the block. And of course, one last thing, I think I've covered everything with this so far. I've covered the power, what you can do with changing the angles, the capacitor and all that, so when it's charging up, it's firing, the rotor systems, all the reactors needed to make it work. Ah yes, one last thing. Let's say, if I was to delete these, let's say we wanted a super powerful beam, but we didn't want it to charge up in a little cube shape. Well, that's where we can do something like this. So what I've done here is pasted in a load of the small laser generators and have redirected them all to go to this one block right here. So what I'm going to do next is, well, spawn in a ton of these, if I can. There we go. That should be enough power for them. And I'm going to turn them all on, like so, and I'm going to switch them all to power on. So now we have a super beam coming out of here. It's even got a fancy little red ring coming out of it. So we can do stuff like this. If you wanted to have a super beam straight off the bat, you can just build a loaded generators to avoid the charging up system with the 4 blocks creating a loop. And these are going to be disastrous. What I'm going to do right now before I continue, because there was a major lag spike while pasting these in, is very quickly go over the ending part of this video. So the laser combiner, the cost itself is 10 bulletproof glass, 20 steel plates, 2 large steel tubes, 20 bulletproof glass, 10 small steel tubes, 40 construction components, and 20 more steel plates. For the laser generator, it's 5 bulletproof glass, 20 steel plates, 5 large steel tubes, 20 small steel tubes, 60 superconductors, 40 construction components, 5 computers, 15 metal grids, and 20 steel plates. So they're the small ones. They are relatively cheap to build once you've got into space, and they are quite fun to use. And then for the large one, we start with the combiner, which is 50 bulletproof glass, 50 steel plates, 45 superconductors, 50 more steel plates, 5 large steel tubes, 50 small steel tubes, 200 construction components, 100 steel plates extra. Then we have the capacitor, which once again were met by the bulletproof glass by 30, 50 steel plates, 150 steel plates, 70 superconductors, 20 large steel tubes, 50 small steel tubes, 140 construction components, and 150 metal grids. So far for the ion system, it's not too bad. Until we get to the generator, which requires 25 bulletproof glass, 135 steel plates, 575 more steel plates, 200 large steel tubes, 350 small steel tubes, 375 superconductors, 400 construction components, 20 computers, 125 more steel plates, and I believe that is 335 metal grids for the generator. So it's rather expensive, but not too bad. But then again, you will have to use the combiners as well as the capacitors in order to get this system up and running. What I've done over here, if I just switch this to daytime to make it easier to see, although it's not that easy to see, it doesn't matter how many generators you build, the laser itself that comes out of it will always be tiny, unless of course you build a loop somewhere on it, which will then go like that. And there is the beam. If we were to shove a capacitor on one of these, like so, we can see it very slowly charge to the maximum. And then when we're done, we can just remove that and boom. But yes, this is the beam system. It will be in the description below if you wish to download and try yourself. I believe I covered everything in this video. So anyway, thank you all for watching. I'll be back with another video some point soon. Bye bye.